I got it from my sister. What's the web page? What's the Facebook page?
Authentic Dialogue. Let me put it.
Okay.
Even the YouTube is at Authentic Dialogue. Tumefika hapo. Okay. Yes.
I am celebrating with you in the growth.
Amen. Amen. Okay. Good morning, the people who have been forced to wake up early. This is me in protest because we are not in East Africa and we are jealous. And good morning, the people in East Africa we are jealous of. Welcome to today's talk. We are going to talk about intergenerational relationships. And as usual, we will start with our Hotuba person. So Sayas, you're up.
Okay, hi everyone. Today we're talking about intergenerational relationships, and my talk is going to be borrowed heavily from the Bible, not because of an effort to proselytize anyone or to undermine any other religion, but the Bible is an interesting text. It, in many cases, has books called books of generations, and because of its historical nature, allows you to see intergeneration relationships unfold. To help me do this, I want to zoom in on perhaps a very popular story, the story of David, Israel's most influential king and hero of war. The story unfolds with his predecessor, or for today's discussion, the previous generation called Saul, having fallen out with favor with God, and becomes necessary that the next king should be anointed. And the prophet who was responsible for that job is called Samuel. And Samuel makes a tour all the way to Bethlehem, where the general area of Bethlehem, where David's family is found. His father is called Jesse. And you immediately arrive on the scene and you realize there is a different generation here. There's the father's generation, which is Jesse, who's really hosting everyone. And then there are the elder brothers of David, or Jesse's elder sons. So they're brought before the prophet, and the prophet is unimpressed or declares that these are not the people who should lead the nation where it is. And you clearly see there's a problem with the generations, because when the father, Jesse, generation 1, is asked if these sons are all there is, generation 2, he says, there is another generation. And to just make you understand how he thought about that generation, David was somewhere in the field taking care of sheep. And right here, you're seeing multiple generations. There is Samuel's generation, way older. Then there's Jesse's generation, a bit older. Then there is David's elder brothers. And then there is David. And so David is brought into the feast, and lo and behold, he is anointed to be king. You expect that from there things will go great. You expect that the generations will get it, that, hey, for success to happen, we need to come together around this young guy who's going to be the future. But not quite. The next time we're meeting David in any significant way is in 1 Samuel, the Bible book of 1 Samuel, chapter 17, or that famous story about David and Goliath. And again, happens very interestingly. One generation, Jesse, sends the youngest generation, David, to take food to the previous generation, his brothers who are out at war. And I almost want to put at war in quotes, because for 40 days they've been standing in formation, but there's really not been any combat, because there's this huge giant Goliath. When I Googled out his size, he was 9 feet 9. That's huge. Who had basically, the war was at standstill. But what's interesting is that when David arrives at the war, instead of him being welcomed by his brothers with excitement and joy, there's very evident tension. There's almost outright hostility and something borderline jealousy. There's mockery, there's lack of harmony. one again would have expected that his brothers, who knew better that, hey, our brother has been anointed to be the next king, should be mentored, should be nurtured, should be helped to be well. In fact, that generation didn't see that well. Saul was completely distrusting of David's capability, that in a bid to release him to go and face the giant, Saul, who was around 6 or 7 feet tall, takes his entire metal armor and places it on David, who by all accounts is described as a boy. He was probably around 5 feet. So when you take 6 feet armor and place it on a 5-foot boy, David just had to try it for a bit and say, this ain't working. And right there again, you see generations stuck. David's generation had prepared for war, fighting with bears and lions, but Saul's generation had prepared for war using the conventional means. And instead of them merging at that point and seeing what's the best of both worlds, you see one generation trying to impose their strategy on another. And what's worse, the brothers who were on the battlefield were already urging David to leave the battlefield altogether. And David wins that war. And when you go back home, everyone is singing, saying, hey, recognizing what one generation has done. They say Saul has killed his thousands, but then also recognizing that there is another generation in town. They say, but David has killed his tens of thousands. Now, again, one would expect that after David has spared the nation of its blushes by killing Goliath, that the next generation, Saul and company, would be on hand to nurture, support, work together, collaborate. But it unleashes an entire borderline civil war situation. David would spend the next bit of close to 12 to 18 years as a fugitive. And instead of one generation, the Saul generation, trying to nurture the next generation, the David generation, the Saul generation waged an intense war. David had to spend many of his years living in caves. And I began thinking, when I was reading this entire story, how does David do to the next generation? At least he does something different, because when you read the account in 1 Samuel chapter 21, you then read later on about the account when David is finally in charge, when he becomes king, he would fight the remainder of Goliath's brothers. Goliath apparently had 4 other brothers, giants, but the interesting thing is David killed none of the remaining giants. He depended on the next generation to do it for him. In fact, one of the giants had to be killed by his own nephew. It's very eye-opening when I was there for just analyzing in preparation for today's session, David's story. I realized that he represented a generation that was completely misunderstood, misapprehended, and therefore misleveraged and fought. But when the time came for him to do different, at least did different, it seems he took upon himself the care to raise another generation of warriors. And what's more, he didn't hand over power to his peers. He handed over power to his son, Solomon, whom he took quite an amount of time to instruct him in what statecraft really looked like. This is a story in the Bible, but just how many times do its dynamics apply in our everyday life? How many organizations, rather than embracing the spectrum and the tapestry of its generations, we begin seeing one generation suspecting another or fighting another or undermining or undercutting another. In African traditional settings, the intergenerational thing was really valued, and nowhere else was it seen, especially in the arrangements and preparations for war. What basically used to happen is individuals would be organized around their ages, but army regiments would be organized with the understanding that the more senior individuals would impart wisdom to the junior ones. And the armies that were very good at winning wars, the Shaka armies, for instance, were very good at integrating the various generations. Now, maybe gone are the days where we fought other communities for whichever reasons, but we face common struggles as humanity. We face new Goliaths as humanity, everything ranging from war, the war on climate change and the culture wars that are happening. And perhaps it's time to begin asking ourselves, are we more inclined like Saul to fight the generations because they threaten us? Or are we more like David, who thinks more about nurturing the next? And the difference in that is what will make us see our generational differences as an asset or our generational differences as a liability. It all depends on us. And back to us in studio today as we study intergenerational relationships.
I thought he was going to say Genesis. Chakua, let's go to you. Just define for us what exactly are intergenerational relationships.
Tongue twister right there.
I know.
Yeah, oh gosh, I don't have a definition actually. I should have a sorted for a definition, but I'll just talk about, for me, what my view of the whole of that space. It's really just how we are relating to one another across the different generations. And that is so much affected by our history, the things that we have experienced in our generation. And what happens is that every generation actually thinks they have the answers to the current problems that are going on. And I read that somewhere and I was like, oh my gosh, I believe that myself. I believe that in my generation, we're the ones who have answers. And it was being told in a sense of really that's not the truth. But really, it's just how we are passing, how we are communicating, how we are passing down information, how we are connecting with one another. But beneath that really is what belief systems are we bringing into our present as we are interacting. And when I reached out to you, Posa, it was actually a reaction of a conversation I'd had in a group where many of us are Generation X, okay? The ones who are born between 60, I have to check the exact, 65 and 80, okay? And we are, and a few of the boomers, actually, that group also has some boomers as well. And boomers are the ones between 45 and 60, 64, 46 and 64, 1946 and 1964. So the conversation was out of exasperation and what Saya says, ridicule. There was a lot of ridicule. There's just that exasperation of what is wrong with our current generation. Why aren't they getting it? Okay, and it was more, look at the way they communicate. When they are communicating, it's XAXA for Sasa, and very short phrases that you don't really get until you have to go and look for a way of unpacking that, someone to translate it for you. But there's a sense of exasperation from this generation about the generation that is coming. But for me, who's been in therapy and I work with all the generations, what we don't understand is sitting here from our sort of high chair and a chair of sort of we have more information and we know, they are also looking at us with the same exasperation and scorn. Okay, we don't get that. And so what is happening with the different generations is that rather than try and build a bridge to understand one another, we're all building walls. And it's more of what is wrong with these people. And the younger generation are like, these guys are so inauthentic. They are so fake, because they're like, I was talking to a millennial who was telling me, we can see through you guys. We can see through the pretense. We can see through the inauthenticity. We can see through, you guys just need to be real. Stop being like that. So that's my definition of intergenerational relationship and my experience of it, therefore, thereof.
Thank you. Asking the same question, and you can also frame it the same way Carol has. And yes, he doesn't have dreadlocks. Am I the only one who should shave my hair now?
I don't have hair on my head. Maybe I will start by looking at the Guinness Book of World Records. In one of the editions, they had talked about a family that had 6 generations alive at the same time. So meaning in this specific family, they had someone was 103 years old. So this was a great-great-grandmother. Then they had another one who was 83 years old. So this was a great-great-grandmother. Then they had a great-grandmother at the age of 62 years old. Then there was a grandmother at 43 years old, a mother at 18, and then the youngest member of the family was 3 weeks old. So you can see in this generation, I mean, in this specific family, they had 6 generations of individuals. Now, in psychology, mainly when we talk about intergenerational relationships, a lot of times we look at it in the form of relationships between family generations as opposed to demographic generations. So family generations means mainly you are looking at the relationship between the family members who are of different generations, as opposed to demographic generations when you're talking about cohorts of people who are born during the same period. So like, for example, when you talk about the people who are born between 1946 and 1955, the Americans call them baby boomers. I don't know if Kenyans call them the same. You may find, so there are those cohorts of individuals who are having relationships as they go along. So at the moment also we talk about social generations. And here we are looking at people who have been born in the same cohort and they have shared experiences. So like how my colleague has talked about Generation X or Generation Y, you mainly find that these are social generations because they seem to be experiencing the same cultural or economic changes that we're going through. So for example, people who are born when the internet was developed and the internet has spread, probably they look at their lives different from the people who are born during the 60s, the 70s, when the internet was not as widely accepted. The other thing also is to look at, in terms of family generations, if you look at many families, you'll find the length of the family generation is usually around 30 years, in the sense that approximate age when people have their first child. So you find a mother, or rather grandfather, mother, and then child, you find there's always that kind of range of between 20 and 30 years for most families. And then also you find for these family generations, a lot of other factors come into play. For instance, the social economic status. I remember one time I was working in a clinic and I met a grandmother of 39 years old. So she was 39 and she was already a grandmother. So you can imagine, and it was because of the circumstances around their social economic status. Then, so for us in counseling, most times we find you're interacting with families of one generation. There are times we find ourselves inviting clients and the grandmother comes to the counseling session, the parents come to the counseling session, and the children come to the counseling session. So of course, what happens is that now I have to adjust my counseling skills to be able to suit these 3 generations of individuals who have come to the counseling session. Then the other thing also that we look at is that for us to be able to understand family generations, there is a tool that we use. It's a diagram that we normally draw. We talk about the genogram. I don't know if you've heard of the genogram, or I don't know if Americans say genogram. So it's normally a pictorial depiction of the significant relations within the family. So you find I draw the marital dyad, the husband and the wife. Then I draw their parents and the different relations they had from the parents' side. Then I also draw from the grandfather's side. And it helps me to be able to know the background of each individual through the generations. It has been found to be very useful, especially if you want to examine the emotional processes that family members go through, the relationship patterns that they also go through, and also experiences. For example, you'll notice in certain families, single parenthood is moving from one generation to another. Or you notice in certain families from one generation to another, there's always alcoholism. Other times you also find from one generation to another, maybe there is a suicidal behavior. So usually when you draw this kind of diagram, it helps us to be able to understand how these patterns repeat themselves from one generation to another. It also helps us to understand the types of emotional problems that we transmit from our parents to ourselves to our children, and the children then transmit to their children. So of course, this is one of the ways of looking at the intergenerational relationships. The other thing that I have found interesting of late, as I interact with people of my age, is we find we are in a situation of caring for our aging parents. So for those whose parents are still alive, you are in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, you know you are caring for your aging parents. So that's something that is significant. Then there are those who, as they grow older also, they start having interactions with their adolescent children and adult children. So of course, this becomes very significant because now we start asking ourselves, how do I understand that we are coming from different generations? So that's how I would look at it as we start our discussion. Over to you.
So my question, this is to Saya. I know we did have great grandfathers and all that because we have the vocabulary for that, because we have Vilembe Kweza, meaning those generations were there. But I'm just wondering what the effect on intergenerational relationships has when the courtesy of the entry of family planning and our life expectancy in Africa as a whole has improved. What I know it's clear in my head, but I hope you understand my question. What has been the effect of family planning, because we are getting our children later? I mean, because the age gap between me and mom is like 20 years. We are almost the same age set for the things we learned in history. And then my friends are getting their first babies now in our 40s. Have I just aged ourselves? Yeah, in our 40s, we are getting our first babies. So what has that done to intergenerational relationships? I hope you accused me last time, so I'm trying to be nice.
So what it has done, I in fact could even add one more other moderating factor, two more. One is education. Girls are taking longer to have children, and one of the reasons for that is education. They're staying longer in school before they're onset to getting children. And then the other attenuating factor is urbanization. So the generations could be alive, but either not co-located or playing uniquely different roles than before. So all factors considered, the intergenerational relationships has changed in a few ways. One is, back in the days, before all of these factors kicked in, onset of birth began in late teens, somewhere around 17, in some places 16. So it meant by the time your child was a teen, in and of themselves, experientially, they were not too far. So you'd be 32 and your child is 16. So the comfort to talk would be easier. but now you basically a boomer giving the child you're going to raise is going to definitely be a generation completely distinct. So there's something called carryovers from one generation to another. Just there's this show about kids react. So so it's basically kids are exposed to different things and they react. And so in that particular episode was the being shown technology we grew up with. So one kid was given a diskette, a floppy drive, and the reaction was priceless. They said somebody 3D printed the Save logo. Like that was what came to that kid's mind. And so clearly it's very hard to do carryover, to tell that kid like, no, that is the equivalent of what a flash drive would have been in this time. So one definite effect is the differences, for instance, between parents and their children is that they are born in very distinctly different generations. And the generations, one of the key things that is different is the values, the things that people value. So we, born who are now in our 40s, we are born at a time when we were very collectivist in nature, discipline, fundraising, and everything. But the kids being born now, the Gen Zs, the Gen I, the Gen now, are more individualistic in their nature. And so the bigger time difference between, say, parent and child, will not even come between child and grandchild. It means there'll be a challenge in carrying over values from and worldviews and perspectives from one generation to another. And then secondly is transmission time. If my grandmother is, if before modernity and everything came, before colonization came, probably it's my grandmother who was my mother's midwife. So basically she would have been in my life from day zero all the way to now. But now we are living in a time where if my grandmother is with us, she's probably a glorified nanny, but in most cases, she's not present. So the touch points become fewer and fewer. And that means the links in history, the links in sharing and transmitting values, becomes, the thread just becomes way and way bigger. In traditional Africa, the masters of ceremony during like circumcision, people are circumcised in groups, not individually as they are. You're circumcised with your age mates. And the circumcision was not just chopping of your foreskin or knocking off of your 60th. Like, man, the latter is just gruesome. Like, how do you just knock 60th of an adult? But anyway, moving away from that is during the healing process from that biologically and medically very challenging thing, what would happen is the next generation, the previous generations would be there to teach you what it meant to be a man or a woman or whatever it was. Now, we don't have very strong rites of passage as a result. And therefore, I would attribute from my armchair research, would attribute part of the mental health challenges we are having to that. Let me go on a bit of a tangent to explain here. Before our education system was reformed, Kenya, we had the NYS process, where after you finished your high school, you went to NYS. And in NYS, it was basically age groups. It was an entire age group put away together for, was it 6 or 9 months or for that amount of time? Now, the modality of doing it might have been bad, like there was, probably lots of bullying and hardening, but there was a certain value that thing did. And it brought an entire generation together, and they shared in values, they became comrades and everything. And when you hear them talk and when you see just basically the mental fortitude that generation had, it was way better than subsequent generations, which have been, courtesy of all the things we've discussed, they've been kind of let loose to navigate uncharted waters without compass, radar, or guide to be with them. So I think one of the collaterals that is ending up happening is mental health issues for now are happening because of the failure in intergen. It's one thing it's one thing for you to feel or have certain questions or have certain aspirations and you're figuring them on your own. And another thing for your uncle or your grandpa to be able to sit down and tell you authentically from their experience that, hey, what you're going through is normal. It's going to be well. Right now, we're in a time where, because we're very individualistic and because of the break that has happened as a result of changes that have been triggered by education, modernization, and everything, people are finding themselves more and more closed away, other than the generations sharing their wisdom between each other. And therefore, there is a net effect on that. And then finally is the impact of what we call gatekeepers. You realize that, like, for instance, right now we have everybody from baby boomers to Gen Z in the workplace. And because the workplace, for instance, is more technologically advanced, Gen Zs arrive on the workplace with an advantage because they were probably born with the aid of some something. While boomers have the advantage of experience, the Gen Zs have the advantage of technology. And therefore, the tension you begin experiencing immediately, both in the home, in the workplace, is people beginning then to protect their turf rather than them doing what should normally have been done, which is, hey, how do we commit and transmit this knowledge and begin giving the wisdom? And while that is seen at the workplace, same thing is happening at home, that instead of people collaborating, father collaborating with son and with grandpa, there's a certain inherent competition, or I know better, you're not too smart kind of attitude that is there. And at the end of the day, the spaces where intergenerational relationships needed to either be nurtured or maximally leveraged, then end up becoming spaces of strife rather than spaces of collaboration. Those would be my 2 cents.
I'm sorry, I need to add you to add the effect of HIV, especially for the communities that were affected the most, because I know, like, the LGBTQ community, most of them lack older, like boomer and silent generation peers, because of the scourge of HIV took a lot of them away. I just want you to comment on that, then I can move to Carol.
Within economical circles, like economy scholars and demography people, there's a generation that was born so that HIV became a thing in 82, 83. That's when, like, 81, 82, 83. So the generation that was reaching sexual activity peaking around that time, many of them were decimated, a bit more disproportionately in some corners, say, of Kenya than others. Of course, for 2 reasons. I know, like, Uganda had a problem because the HIV variant in Uganda is a bit more virulent, and the sexual practices in Uganda and South Africa, for instance, were such that the spread was high and the denialism was higher, that fueled it. But just a case in point is in Kenya, I do know, like, certain cultural practices disproportionately disadvantaged Westerners, the people from the Western half and people from the coastal area. And so what happened is there was a whole generation of the people who were meant to be in their late teens through to their 20s and early 30s. And even as I speak, I have faces, I have lost relatives to HIV. I have friends whose parents, friends who are basically orphans, and I can be able to actually tell what their age was. And it was that age which, in the early 80s through to late 80s and early 90s, were reaching sexual maturity, which was the time when HIV was a real menace. What has happened to them is, and fighting emotion at this time, what has really happened to them is, there was the older generation that was killed. And then what happened is a big lacuna, and the grandparents were left. So what happened is, children, instead of being raised by the immediate prior generation, ended up having to be raised by a generation detached from them, which was probably their grandmothers, because homesteads ended up being left with either very young children with the grandmothers or just grandmothers. I have personally walked into homesteads that had to be locked up, like the entire lineage was done away with. In the workplace, the effect for that was, I remember there was a demographic analysis that was done like for the Kenyan workforce, and that same exact age group is largely missing. It's basically, for the best intents, absent or in very small proportion of the workforce. So what that does to the public service is it makes it necessary for people to extend the period until pension. So it made part of the reason we ended up having to move retirement age by 5 years was in a back effect of that. And then secondly, it meant for the workforce needed time to have the spaces created backfilled, and then for the values and the knowledge and the expertise to then be transmitted between the ages. And when you listen carefully, like many workspaces around that time, and even up to now, you begin hearing people saying, this generation is lazy, this generation is not hardworking. It had to do with a failure within some time. There was an older hardworking generation, then there was an absent generation, then there was a generation that came in which the depiction was it was a generation in a hurry. And partly they needed to be hurried through quite some number of things because there's quite some gap they needed to fill up in terms of literal bodies that they needed to put in the workplace, and also secondly, a skill set gap that they needed to do. So that effect is there in the community, in our churches, and in our public service.
Okay, Carol, you're up. If you want to react to anything Saya said, but what issues are you seeing? What issues are you seeing at the workplace, in families, schools, wherever the generations are interacting with each other?
Yes, I think I can pull out whatever comes naturally from what Saya said, but let me just answer your question. A lot of issues, and there is messages that each generation is, there's some beliefs. So let me backtrack a bit. Our parents, who are the boomers, and I don't know if there was a boom during their period the same way. You know, these descriptions are very Western. Even when you read and describe, they're very, very Western. But when I think about it, my mom had 17 siblings, and I have 4 or 5 siblings. So I guess there was a boom in population there. But the main message that the boomers have of when I'm interacting of the next generation, which is us, when we were growing up, I don't know if you remember that song of so many vijana muongeze pia bidii, mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri. So it was just go to school and get a job. And the jobs were very clearly cut out. You know, it's either doctor or teacher. Teachers were well respected then, or a lawyer, okay? And so the message, when our parents came into the workforce, that's still, I mean, when our parents came into the workforce, they were just like, phew, at least I have a job. And therefore, that's the message they sent to us as well. Work hard and get a job. But for us, that wasn't a priority as much as looking at how they hustled. So in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to hustle as much as my parents did, because I've watched them take care of me and take care of their parents. So let me work extra hard so that I am able to take care of, make sure that my children don't take care of me. So what I'm seeing with our generation, Generation X, is we are working extra hard to make sure, first of all, we still have our parents to take care of. Then we are working extra hard to make sure we have a good retirement so that our children don't have to work hard to take care of us. So there's that, which is quite different from our parents, who took us to school so that we could earn money and help them, in their old age. So there's a lot more of us being careful in the sense that we want to be able to also have a retirement to take care of ourselves so that we don't become a burden to our children, okay? Then the other crop I've seen of our Generation X is also those who are also working hard to have an investment for their children so that their children also don't have to struggle so hard. So I feel like in our Generation X, we are spread thin economically because we are fixing our parents, we're taking care of ourselves and giving our children the best education so that they don't have to work so hard to settle in. But then that is at the expense of the emotional presence for our children, okay? Now, what the millennials I have seen doing, and millennials are, let me go back first of all to Generation X. We are a bit aware of mental health, but we are quick to take our children for therapy, but not us. There's just a wall we built around going for therapy willingly ourselves. But we are okay, let you go talk to your child. And I get a lot of my peers sending their children to me to talk to them. And it's very hard for me to try and convince them and to look them in, but that's what I do mostly as a parent coach, to just be able to say, look, I have some information for you, can you come? But the millennial parents actually are a lot easier to just go and look for help, like therapy for themselves. Because one of the things, they are more aware of the struggles that they are, again, millennial parents, their parents are still boomer parents, not necessarily Generation X. We are too close for many of them to have been our children. So they've watched their boomer parents also struggle, dig in, say, they have that at least mentality of at least you have a job, at least. So they've seen them struggle to get by, and they're trying to break free of that mold because they also have enough information as millennial parents to see how childhood trauma has affected them, to see how the decisions their parents have made have damaged them, and therefore they are more open and willing. So most of my parenting clients are millennials because there's a sense of openness of, oh, I actually do need help. I don't want to pass the pain straight to my kids the way my parents did. So there's a lot more openness with the millennial parents in seeking therapy, and also in allowing their children also to go for therapy. So I'm seeing those changes, in fact, in terms of just help-seeking behavior and openness in that sense. But back to just, again, those experiences I was talking about earlier, the levels of exasperation. And I was trying to pick out what are some of these messages that we are sending to each other. And I just noted a few, there is the boomers usually will send that message of, be grateful there is food on the table, because having food on the table was a very big deal during their time of growing. There's a message like, be grateful you have a job. So those are the messages that they passed to their children, that at least I have a job and I can provide for you. Those are not the things that our, especially Generation Z, are worried about. Okay, they've come into a space where food is available, at least for the bigger part of the generation. Food is available. They're looking at their parents who have struggled to stick to jobs that they don't like, and they're saying, I deserve better. Now, millennials have said, I deserve better, and have tried to work it, but now the Gen Zs are the ones who are really giving that message, I deserve better. Why? There is so much information out there. So the breakdown of the community and communal setting then has made it impossible for us to be the only source of information for our children. And whenever there is a gap in terms of passing down information, in terms of raising children, that gap has to be filled by something. And so that gap has been filled by, boom, the 150 million teachers, okay? So our Generation Z children have 150 million teachers at the click of a button. And here I am still trying to teach them the, because mom knows best, because I say so. And yet there is so much information there that, in quotes, makes sense for them, makes sense to them, okay? Than mom who is, they see through my weaknesses, they see through my inauthenticity, and therefore I probably haven't inspired a lot of respect in them already because of my own issues and because of my own struggles. And so they prefer to go, not they prefer, I mean, the only source of information that is here, and it's a lot, is from the internet. And they get all this information that tells them you deserve better, you can, and they also give them information about what mental health is, what to look out for, what are some of the causes and underlying reasons. And they're like, this looks like my mom. This sounds like my mom. She is the one who has a problem. And remember, at Generation Zs are, our teenagers, they still are not yet fully developed in terms of experience, in terms of their logical thinking, to be able to separate those things. So they grab the information they have. So there is a lot of information they are getting that is sort of undermining our authority. And they come and they question us. And for us, we are reactive to them. And we are like, it's easy for us to put our wall and say, it's because I'm your mom, it's because I say so. So that whole messy confusion there for me, we need to step back and just breathe. I like to say, let's breathe in and out fast and figure out what is really going on. As an individual, what am I supposed to do to be able to heal? Because that's one of the things. We just really need to heal from the negative messages. How am I able to sort through? Because I am still the older one. I am still the person who has more experience in many things, okay, outside of the 150 million teachers. I have more experience. I have stories that I can share. They can bring value to this child. But then I also need to show up in a way that is not defensive. I need to show up in a way that I'm seeking to also understand this generation that is, they come in with a lot of passion, they come in with a lot of energy, and there's a lot we can also borrow from them. So those are some of the dynamics I'm experiencing. Then maybe one more I can say is our children also just have a lot more options in terms of just many, in terms of their values. You can pull in a little bit of Buddhist here and a little bit of Jesus here and a little bit of this and put it together, because again, they are being told the options are many. You don't have to stick to just the cassette recorder and forward it. You can come up with your own playlist. You see, they have so many more options out there for them. And we need, for me, at the baseline is, how can I step back and understand where they are coming from, rather than come at them and attack them as this entitled brats, as we call them sometimes. Back to you, Kosa.
So is this true for my village mates in today? It's Eshinam Wenyuri. Are they also experiencing the same, or this is the children who are exposed to technology and have bundles and everything? Are you seeing like this is true across from Turkana to Athi?
No, it's not blanket. For sure, it's not blanket. It's different because there's still a sense of community back in your village of Eshi, whatever that word. There's still a sense of community and less exposure and a bit more of rigidity in terms of being open to information in those spaces than for us whose children have access, to all the information at the click of a button. And then, however, I it's a good question, Posa. I wish I had an answer, because I know for sure that this mobile gadget is accessible to that child in Turkana as well. It's just that what interests does the child in Turkana have as opposed to what my son at 13 here has. But I believe that the exasperation, what are these children up to? We don't even know what they're up to. They're spoiled and all. That sense of exasperation, I believe, cuts across the different cultures. And maybe to just confirm that, you probably have come across this quote by Socrates, who lived way before Jesus was born. And he said, the children now love luxury. They have bad manners. They have contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teachers. That's generational gap version before Jesus. I think he lived in 399 BC. So my point here is the exasperation. It doesn't matter which economic situation, rural, urban, or whatever, there's still that gap of what is going on with our children. It's something that we continue to grapple with from one generation to another.
Okay, thank you. Austin, your wrap. So same question, what is exasperating the patients, the parents, and you can also put on your HR hat a bit and just tell us what's exasperating HR officers at the workplace. And one more thing, if you could add the a bit of us in diaspora, how we are handling it, because from Eshnam, when you leave, and I landed in St. Paul, Minnesota. And then my child over here is not only just mixing Saksa, she's also talking about African American vernacular English. My teacher, Mrs. Mbogo, rest in peace, would weep, and many other examples. So just go ahead.
Thank you for the question. So looking at it from a HR point of view, I think one of the first things we ask ourselves is about the psychology of work. What is it that an individual is looking for in a job? So you'll notice that across generations, we have different expectations about our jobs and the rewards that come from those jobs. So you'll find amongst the young people these days, one of the things that is interesting is that if the job is not challenging, then you'll not be able to retain this individual. They want something that is challenging. We also expect to work with positive people and companies or organizations that can help us to fulfill our goals. We also want to be treated with respect, in spite of the age differences. Then also the other thing you'll find for organizations that have a lot of young people, we want friendly environments. So you'll find the millennials will not respond to workplaces that are very hierarchical in terms of organization. Then also the other thing we like is we like flexible schedules. So you'll find when Corona came, it was easy to adapt working from home or working in a flexi schedule compared to the older generations. Then the other thing is about outputs as opposed to inputs. So you'll find someone will tell you, I can work for 3 hours and get the same output compared to someone who's working for 8 hours and gets the same type of output. So that's one of the things that I find interesting about the millennials. Whereas now when you look at the people who are born, the ones who are calling Generation X, a lot of times at the workplace, these individuals are interested in systems. They're interested in things that are forward thinking. So you'll find there's also issues to do with seniority and age, issues to do with input that is evaluated, and also the individuals being evaluated on merit. Then if they can't see the reason for a task, it will be very difficult for you to get engaged with them. So if someone belongs to this generation and they see the rationale of the instructions they are being given at the workplace, it becomes easy to actually engage them because they will seek and understand it. Whereas if they don't get reasons for doing it, it becomes difficult to actually retain these individuals. So this is one of the things that we ask ourselves: what do you expect out of work, or what is your psychology of work? The other one is about asset. At the workplace, what would you consider as an asset to your work? So you find for the millennials, a lot of times they are goal-oriented. Many of the people who are joining workforce these days are highly educated compared to our parents before. A lot of the young people are joining with a positive attitude. They've been exposed to technology, and they're very tenacious. Generation X, they adapted well to change because they are moving through different changes at that time. They were very direct communicators. So you'll find people who belong to this generation at the workplace, they're very open in their communication. They do, they're multitaskers in the sense that you'll find someone is doing several tasks at the same time. At the same time, they value feedback. So that's one of the things that we reflect upon in terms of the work assets. The other one is about the liability. What is it that they dislike? So for example, a young person, in as much as they're coming to the workplace with inexperience, they do not expect to be managed by inexperienced managers, if I may use that kind of a phrase. They also need supervision. So these young people, they need supervision, they need structure. At times you may find, because of the difference in generational culture, we may find that we may say that this individual lacks discipline. Other times we've interacted with people who have high expectations, and based on these expectations, there are those who have difficulty in dealing with difficult people. So you'll find if you have a difficult client and you've given them to a millennial, sometimes you may find they may not be able to work well with that difficult client because of the inexperience. And then if the managers are very authoritarian, again, you'll find you may not be able to work well with them. However, for the Generation Z, Generation X, the other thing that you'll find for this cohort is that they may dislike rigid work requirements. They may lack people skills, or they may lack a long-term outlook in terms of their work liability. So that's something also that we find ourselves mainly reflecting whenever we go to workplaces. Then, of course, in terms of leadership, you'll find also the leadership styles varies across different generations. Also, their view on authority, it also varies across generations. So you'll find the millennials view authority in a relaxed manner compared maybe to Generation X, who may be unimpressed by authority. If you do an exercise at the workplace, there's an exercise that we've done where we ask someone to write, who is my hero at the workplace. You will get very interesting responses in terms of who is my hero. The other one is about the interaction styles. A lot of organizations these days will take their staff members for team building exercises. And during those team building exercises, you'll be surprised to see also the interactive styles are different across generations. For us young people, we are very participative in terms of our interaction, whereas maybe the Generation X would be very goal-oriented in terms of the interaction, or what you might call utilitarian. Someone will talk about what is the value of your friendships and relationships, as opposed to are you participating in your friendships and relationships? Then the older generation, you'll find there are those who love to have meetings. Meetings. So you find they love meetings and they love to be team players. So you find also in terms of the interaction styles, we've found there are differences that come with it. The other one is about the communication styles. Also, we've experienced differences of communication styles across the generations, especially now. We have access to the internet, we have access to smartphones and emails. So you'll find for us young people, anytime can be a communication time. Whereas for the Generation X person, they might tell you, call me only at work or on my work phone. You know, there are those rigid expectations in terms of communication. So those are some of the things that I can think about in terms of the differences in generation at the workplace, experiencing the same as I go through it. One of the interesting questions that we've had to deal with is about work-life balance. Work-life balance, and for young people, balance is very important. But of course, you'll find that those who will sacrifice balance occasionally because of the value someone will have. If I don't work, I may not be able to finance my lifestyle. But for the older generation, you'll find that those who talk about working to live and not living to work. So there's always that kind of phrase. Our parents' generations, they live to work. They didn't have a balance. So they're interested, you'll find they had interest in fulfilling the obligations of the employer. And sometimes you would hear of people who worked for many years without even taking a break or going on leave because they lived to work. So those are some of the things that come to mind as we proceed with this discussion.
Thank you, Austin. And Sarah, because we are religious and you need to put on your religious hat, what differences are you seeing in terms of worship and in religious places? I know your experience is limited to Christianity, but we can, for now, because I have ditched Hussein for a while, you can be our imam, priest, Buddhist, everything, Papa, Waroma, everything.
I wouldn't be able to authoritatively speak about Islam, and stuff. There's actually a study that came out last week. It's actually last week by Banner Research. They studied over 2,000 teens across the world, this time like literally around the world. So still digging into that. What Thomas, I prefer Belutza, has been able to bring out about the behavior of the various generations in work is almost mirror image of what you see within the generations in the religious circles. So the older generation, the boomers and to some degree the Gen X were more faith for them was a given. You know, faith was a given, and in most of those times, the thing Chakwa brought out about authority also held, where it was God says it, the Bible says it, that settles it, or you could believe just because your daddy or your mommy or the priest said it. And because of increase in skepticism that happened, especially post the Second World War, when we entered a postmodern era where people had lost faith in science and became more skeptical and began questioning and doubting everything, and which coincided with the same time when Gen X was coming in, and then later on Millennials, the expression of faith changed. And what is noticeable is the willingness to question faith or faith positions increased, as opposed to like the boomer generation. The millennials and the X were, and especially more with the millennials and less with the X, are able to question more of their faith. And because the emphasis, especially in the millennial time, came towards more of creating harmony, there was a push to less emphasize the differences between between what's different between you and another faith position, and was to begin looking for what's more common and less distinct. Of course, for you to do that, there's a bit of intellectual rigor that you lose, and that being here. What we're observing nonetheless is that in Gen Z is the least religious or spiritual generation. And it kind of goes both ways. It's because they are preceding generation, the millennials, those are declining in religiosity. Gen Z are less so religiously inclined, but they are the most open. They are more open to religious dialogue than the previous generation. So they're kind of like a canvas, if you would, to engage with that. As the changes have happened over time, there is a push to move church away from performative. By performative, I mean a few guys going up front and being the stars of the show, whether it's the singer or the preacher. And the drive has been to make church more participatory, where there's more drive towards small groups and organizing the look and the feel of the church so that it feels a bit more inclusive and not more imposing, as it were. Then another big trend that has happened as the generations change has been the church to move away from merely being there for itself, and especially more with millennials and now with Gen Z, is a craving to see the church being involved more in social justice issues and becoming a voice for the voiceless within society, as opposed to my mother's generation, the boomers generation. Church was more to talk about the things of God, which was a pie in the sky, by and by, was a more heavenly oriented theology and a more moralistic theology about what do you need to do to be able to inherit the kingdom of God. The current generation, what we notice is they kind of want a theology that works for them here and now, like, hey, how do we speak about climate? What is a church position on gender and violence? What's a church position on other social justice issues, discrimination, voter fraud, voter apathy, and all those things? So they want a faith that works here and now, and that is way more participatory and more involving, and that tries to smooth things around the edge. It is already a challenge within Christian circles to then speak authentically to the gospel message and still be able to accommodate this. Of course, the challenge therefore becomes for the seminaries that are training and the preachers who are preaching and the naturals who are nurturing to be able to show the distinction of the gospel, but still be able to bring its claims to bear practically within the spheres of art and music and science, which are happening today. The final observation that has happened with the changes in generation is the shift in the centers of influence. So dominantly, initially by the boomers' time, Christianity was stronger in its in Europe and in North America. But with the shifts, as mentioned, what has also been observed is therefore the centers of influence have moved to Africa, to South America, and to certain portions in Asia. Notably is South Korea, and weirdly enough is places like China. The way the church is growing there is very amazing. The South Korea story is nothing short of amazing. So you almost notice that as the demographics change, there's something, I don't know, I'm yet to study more, but what is clear is that, yes, the Christian church is doing extremely well in Latin America and is doing extremely well in Africa and in portions of Asia, but is also, when you superimpose that with the demographics, it is also this, it's a bit interesting because like Africa is becoming younger. It's a younger, what's it called? It's a younger population. And as is being expected or projected is that therefore Africa is headed towards, Christianity in Africa is headed towards the challenges that Christianity in North America and Europe have been able to observe over time. Therefore, one thing I just want to put like off the cuff notes is we often hear people speaking very alarmingly, like, oh, Christianity is dying, and it's really not dying. There's no religion is going to be there in a triumphalistic sense, but I think brilliantly what one of the Banner reports I read captured is the changes in as the generations have been changing, the things that the generation that is leaving church more is telling us is, one, they need help to become better stewards of the learning and the resources they have. And then two is they need more community to help them deal with a sense of alienation. The reason being, a lot of people, one of the reasons faith was given up as the generations changed is Christians, and especially young ones, found that the faith and the world they inhabited during their days of worship, whether it's Sabbath or Sunday, and the world they walked out into were very different, were largely very different. And therefore, there's that sense of alienation that this faith doesn't work in the real world. And in order to mitigate for that, the report encourages that what is needed is for people to begin being given that sense of community to deal with a sense of alienation that they feel, and they need stewardship for the access. Chakwa pointed out very brilliantly that what had happened was people were now able to access more things, the 150 million teachers Chakwa was pointing to, but they'd not been given the tools of faith to be able to navigate or sift through clearly. And therefore, a lot of people were drifting away as a result of that. So the sense of community is needed, the sense of stewardship is needed to navigate these particular challenges. But it's a formidable challenge, and it manifests itself very differently in Africa and Asia than it does in North America and Europe. A few observations, Paul.
Asante sana. So Chakwa, just to go back to you, because you're the teacher over here. Okay, says teacher hat, he can put it down. But how much of these intergenerational issues play a role in school-induced trauma? I know.
School-induced trauma. I think when the way the schools are structured, it's still very colonial and very, I am the authority and my word is law, and therefore you need to bow down to me, and if you don't, these are the consequences. So school-induced, I know you guys had a discussion on school-induced trauma. I wasn't part of it, so I'm not privy to the details of it. But how I would say it from my own experience is that we are still carrying a lot of trauma. I am in the School of Education. And sometimes it's interesting to sit and listen to the exasperation. It's just interesting to see where it's coming from. The point of, I am the last word, I'm the final authority in this space. And therefore, if you come against me, I will land on you. So we still carry a lot of authority as Generation X and Boomer in this space of education. We still carry a lot of authority in terms of our positions, in terms of the titles that we hold in this space. But we then are blocking the free expression that the other generations, especially Generation Z and Y, are very, that comes naturally to them. So there's still that wall. And whenever there's a wall, the person with more power is the one whose last word, stands. So, it still plays out the same. The person in authority has more information, is unwilling to create space for this other one who I am charged of. Then from their side, those who are younger, there's a sense of frustration because they're like, we could do more. We also actually have a voice in this space. So there's still that, the wall is still there, even the wall is still there as a result of the lack of wanting to allow movement of information from one generation to another. I don't know if I have answered the question, Hossa.
Yes, you have. And so, because I want us to at least wind down, and we always end with hope. So what can we, I want us to talk about the positives about intergenerational relationships and how they can heal the schism, the divide, and break down the walls. And Carol, will start with you. What steps should we take as boomers, silent generation, Gen Z, Gen I, whatever, to just break these walls and forge a positive, healsome, there's nothing like that, path?
I think one, just platforms like this are really good because they provoke conversations, and people have light bulb moments. I think that we need to really have more conversations like this, so people begin to appreciate the different generations. We also need to sit down and ask, what does each generation have to offer from wherever they are, And for me, the older generations, I don't know how much the silent generation, we have many of them, but from boomers to X generations, we have a lot to borrow in terms of experience, in terms of, we've tried this, it hasn't worked, and we've tried this. So there's a level of confidence that comes with experience, and therefore we need to tap from the wisdom of the older generation, okay? But then as people in the older generation, we need to also sit back and look at the younger generation, most notably the Y and Z generation, and appreciate the passion and the exuberance and the vitality and the new ideas and the spontaneity that we don't have anymore because we have become cautious because of life. We have a lot to borrow from that energy and that vitality. I think if we were able to create spaces where we are having conversations like this, we are also creating spaces for mentorship, like cross-generational mentorship. I want to be mentored by a millennial. I want to be mentored by a Gen Z. I should be able to sit and be mentored by them, okay? Because they have something they have to offer. And also, I need to create a space where I allow them to come to me for mentorship as well. One of the things I hear from a lot of my generation and boomers is that these people don't even want to come for mentorship from us. They are shutting us off. What we need to do is to dig behind that. Why? We come at them with a lot of judgmentalism. We are very judgmental on them. And because we are the ones who are, again, like I said earlier, holding the positions, there's just a sense of what's the point, okay? But if we're able to step back and open up ourselves to learning from them, to coming to them with less judgment, and most importantly, especially for us in the older generation, find healing, because there's a lot of healing that still needs to happen in us from the different types of trauma, whether it's childhood, whether it's happened at home, whether it's happened in school. We need to open ourselves to healing, to more information. That's the only way we will create that space. At the end of the day, every human being is seeking connection. And trust me, if a 6-year-old, a 15-year-old felt that the 80-year-old in their lives is seeking to connect with them, they become good. Those walls are broken, one, and they're able, there's a lot of information exchange between the two. And there's also that space of, now I'm open to whatever, I will listen to you. The reason they're not listening to us, especially in the older generation, is because we haven't healed enough. We're not working on ourselves enough to be okay with doing whatever it takes to connect to them at their level and to learn from them as well. So there is hope if we are able to allow a level of humility and brokenness. And I think the bigger part that we need to play is from us, the older generation. I can't even believe that I keep saying us, the older generation. When did I become the older generation?
It's like believing 1980s or more than 40 years ago. No, it's not. It's 20.
Yeah, but most of us have grandchildren. I mean, I don't, but most of us have. So we really are the older generations in a sense.
Okay.
Back to you, Kosa.
Austin, your wrap. What should we do to forge ahead? How do we utilize these intergenerational relationships to be a better nation, a better country, a better world?
Thank you for the question. For me, mainly is to promote an attitude of openness, an attitude of creativity, and also an attitude of gratitude because of our experiences. I'll just add on what Carol said about mentorship. I think also the other aspect is about coaching, openness to either receive coaching or to provide coaching to someone of a different generation. So that's something that I'm also taking away. The other one is about the need to invest in our health and wellness. I think that's something that for most of us, regardless of the generation where we are at, we need to invest in our health and wellness, and also learn from each other in terms of health and wellness. So that's how I would look at it. The final one is about motivation. What is it that motivates me in my current generation compared to someone else of a different generation? And how can I be able to use my motivation to also motivate the other person? So that's what I'll take away for today.
Sayurapa, can you just tell us how do we forge ahead, and then and then we'll take. Okay, wait. Let's take. If there are any questions, you can put them, type them in the chat, or we allow people to unmute and ask questions. Otherwise, Saya, you're up.
So, a few ideas. One is new brooms sweep clean, but older brooms are brilliant for doing corners. So for us to have clean rooms, we need to mix both generations, because there are certain things experience will teach you. And so the idea is not to pit one generation over another, but it is for them to work collaboratively together. The younger generation, being smarter and quicker with technology, is able to codify into technology that which the older generation has accumulated through experience, and we need each other. No matter how smart you are or great you are right now, you need to take the posture that there will soon arise a person or people or a generation who will be smarter, quicker, sharper, brighter than you. And the wisdom is to take from the African mantra that we therefore are not owners, but we hold in trust. and be on the lookout for these people who can do it faster, quicker, and smarter. And let's give them the tools so that they can move quicker. By this, I'm not insinuating that it's a question of one generation sweeping off the other from off, but it is both generations just coming to embrace each other. It is to understand that we need to understand the language of each generation. I think the younger generation needs to be taught to understand the older people's generation language, and the older generations need to begin learning to speak in the younger people's language. It's a bit unfair at times that either generation demands authoritatively that they be spoken to in their language without necessarily taking the time to learn or teach. And then gone is the age of just mentorship one way. Now is a time where we need to embrace cross-mentorship, where the younger generations mentor the older and the older mentor the younger, alluding to my first point, which is one has experience of wisdom, the advantage of wisdom. The other one has the advantage of youthful energy and knowing of technology and the possibilities. But if they cross-mentor, it accentuates what each can be able to achieve. The sum will be better than the collective parts put together. And then finally is to just remember that the speed at which culture changes minus the speed at which you are changing, that difference produces what is called irrelevance. So any generation can become irrelevant to another when one generation is changing faster than the other one is willing or able to change. And therefore, we are not able to speak relevantly into another generation's reality if we are irrelevant. And for us to stay relevant, we need to learn the language, we need to learn the values, we need to learn what matters, what they really care about. And I think this is not one way. This is both ways. The younger need to learn about the older need to learn from the younger, and mentorship provides the bit to do this. So it's not all hopeless. I don't think we need to go back to the opening speech. We don't need the attitude that David's brothers and Saul's generation had about the next generation. I think we need the attitude that David had when he was finally in charge, to understand that the younger generations, if properly trained, can provide better giant killers. But the interesting thing from that story was that even when that happened, that generation swore to David and told him, you still need to remain as king. So David, with his experience and battle experiences, was maintained as king. And then the younger generation came up and continued killing the giants that came up. I think such an arrangement is more ideal and can be achieved.
Joanne, because I saw if I see you in the meeting, you'll always speak. Do you want to say anything? And you don't have to come on video.
Not really. These guys have, everything that has been said is pretty good. I think the only thing I would add is, from what Saya is saying, is for us, all generations, to operate from a place of curiosity, because curiosity creates learning spaces for all concerned. And if you're not curious, then you're not willing to receive what is coming your way from whichever direction, whether it's in the workplace, in the home, in the community, in the church. Because curiosity allows people to ask questions and to get answers.
Thank you.
So that's all I would say.
Thank you. Thank you, as usual. Panelists, is there anything I left that you wanted to say? Mumetosheka.
Okay. Let me say this. One of the biggest challenges from the generations, and I see this a lot in religious circles, and for the generations to gain the most from each other, is the gatekeeper mentality. And it doesn't just happen with the older and with the younger. I mean, with the older only, it also happens with the, it happens with the younger. So many like faith circles, and you begin seeing the same attitude in government and in public spaces and public service and stuff, is the older generation then becomes gatekeeper to certain opportunities, while the younger generation becomes gatekeepers to things like technology and things that could improve. And it is born out of either spite of the other generation or suspicion of the other generation. But if we began understanding that we can collaborate, it will take people to be better. So one of the things that I think we need to be very aware is that gatekeeper mentality. It's increasingly making, in many democracies, a smaller category or group of older people keeping on clinging on power and leading young people who are increasingly becoming restless on their own. But if we saw the next generation not as a threat, but as potential partners who we could take up and help us to go even further, and it would take us further. It would just help churches do better. It would help homes become better. It would help governments and countries achieve more. So I think one of the things we need to always call out is when people begin becoming needlessly so gatekeepers.
Okay, thank you. And Sai, you're the one with the English of the nose, so you need to say thank you to the, thank you to the panelists and the audience. And audience, if you have a question, or if you have a question that doesn't need to be broadcasted after SAS says the vote of thanks, gives the vote of thanks, I'm going to stop the live stream, then you can ask a question that you don't want out there. Kizungu.
Okay, so thank you.
Karen hata kama anakimbia huko nyuma.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for making time. Chakua and Obulutsa, thank you so much for the insights from the different worlds that you bring in. And yeah, thank you for making time. And thank you everyone who spared their evenings or their mornings to be on this chat. It makes a big difference to us. We keep growing because of your feedback. We keep growing because of your presence. We keep coming back because you matter to us. So as always, you are encouraged to share this recording. You'll find it on our YouTube page called Authentic Dialogues, on our Facebook page, Authentic Dialogues with Sarah Jackson. Please just take a time, share it with others, and then B, give us feedback. What did we do well? What can we do to improve? And then C is, please feel empowered and free to share what other topics you'd like us to discuss on this platform and any potential panelists you'd like to show up here. Otherwise, from our end, it is thank you. And as one of my friends says, if we talk about something and never attempt to do anything about it, then that time was wasted. So our 2 hours here discussing about intergenerational relationships, if we will go to our homes, our churches, our offices, our governments, our practices, our businesses, our schools, and not try to do something different in the way we relate to generations, then it should be 2 hours that have been wasted. But I'm counting on you, we are counting on you to be the voice of difference, to be a change maker because you can. Back to you. And oh yeah, on the various channels you are on, you will again get to know about our next convo. Posa will tell us what it will be and the date and time. And please do make an appointment. And remember, in the West, our clock changes. So a few of the timings on the calendar will change, not because of any malice, but because we're just, we're now in fall, so our clocks are falling backwards, so there'll be time adjustments. All of that to say, we're still on, be on the lookout. You will get to know when we're having the next one. Yo, Posa to you.
So our next topic will be on November 27th. Yes, Joanne, even with Thanksgiving. It's gonna be on about implicit bias. So join us, and we will try to move it to 6 p.m. I have been given permission by Carol to move it to 6 p.m. until our clocks jump again. Sorry, you East Africans, you have the sun. We just suffer here in anguish and winter.